Hey everybody, Juan here once again with another Power Query video. This table that you're seeing right here is the table that we have built over the last two tutorials, so if you haven't seen them, go check them out, they are in the description. But essentially, we went from a table that looks like this to a table that looks like this. In order to accomplish that, we did quite a lot of clicking on the different features of Power Query. But today we're going to be exploring the M code almost exclusively and seeing how can we make it more reusable. So let's go right to it. When I open my M query, I immediately notice there are some steps that are maybe not very reusable. So some steps that worry me a little bit is right here, this one called remove other columns, and this one called unpivot other columns. Let's explore them one at a time. When I check here the remove other columns, let's format it nicely so that it becomes a bit easier to read. What is actually happening is I have this list of columns, and anything that doesn't necessarily comply to this is going to be removed. But next month, once we have like data for August or whatever month it is in the year, we know that we probably want to include those months in there. What we do know from the previous video is that actually, let's keep these changes for a second. What we do know is that we want to always remove a certain column here which contains the last updated date. And this column is a bit tricky because it's always going to change. So what if, instead of hard coding what we want to select, what if we just tell it what we want to get rid of? And I do understand that this might be tricky. Let's do some steps. The first step I'm going to do is create a variable called column names. This is an M function, column names. For table, I'm going to use remove other columns. And what essentially this thing does is it returns a list of all of the column names. Let's run it, I think. And we have it here. Here is the list of column names. Actually, should probably do this one step before. So instead of from remove columns, we probably want to do this with promoted headers. So the table that we created here, that's probably the one that we are curious about. Okay, I'm gonna click once again on done. Now check where we created. Perfect, so we have all of the columns here, including this one called last updated. Right now we are picking the ones that we want to keep, which is maybe not a good approach considering that the only thing that we want is to get rid of one of them, right? We essentially know that we just want the one that contains something that says something like last updated. So we could as well here create a new step called remove last updated. And what we're essentially going to do is use a method called list find text. A list find text takes a list and it looks around it for a certain thing. In this case, we know it's last updated with a column here. I close this one, make sure that it's wrapped in parentheses. I have to say, working directly in the advanced editor is not a great solution, but it gets stuff done. And if you're really aspiring to become great at Power Query, you really just have to learn to work with it. Now, what we just typed in here is always gonna pick up this column called last updated, or last updated plus a certain date, no matter what that date is in the future. And now that's great news, because we understand that that's really just the column that we don't want. So we could do this two ways now. We could either select everything else, or maybe a simple one would be table, remove columns. Which table are we talking about? Well, in this case, we're talking about the promoted headers table. And the one that we want to remove is the one that we just calculate in here. Let's make sure that everything has been properly closed. In this case, it hasn't. And let's see if we can just simply remove this step and keep remove last updated. Now, what does remove last updated do? It gets rid exactly of the same column, but now we have the insurance that in the future, when things start changing, you're still gonna only get the months, and just get rid of that one thing that we just didn't want. Now, if you were observant, you already noticed that there is an error mark, and that is because we have right here this other command called unpivot other columns, which is also a little bit problematic in the sense that it is taking every single other column besides from product ID. Let's check what is the effect of this column. So other columns wasn't recognized. That actually means that it was waiting for a table called remove other columns. But in this case, no, with this remove last updated should be the table that you're waiting for. Let's see if this fixes. And it looks like it's fixed. So next time, whenever this table gets updated or something like that, well, now you know that it's always going to be up to date. To conclude this video, it's really good to mention that if you really aspire to be great in Power Query, you're going to have to get your hands dirty with them at a certain point or the other. Most of the things are not too difficult. For example, today I just show you how to make this remove last updated more dynamic. And how we did it is using two commands. One of them is column names, and the other one is list find text. I hope you learned something, and see you in the next video.